Mark Reynolds loved his home. Nestled in the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, his backyard was a small sanctuary framed by a sprawling centuries-old oak tree. The tree's massive branches stretched wide, casting a cool, comforting shade over his garden and wooden bench, the perfect retreat after long days at work. Birds nested in its leafy canopy, and on summer evenings, Mark's kids would play under its watchful branches, laughter ringing through the air like a warm melody. But lately, something had shifted in the neighborhood. Karen Mitchell, the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, had been prowling the streets more often. With her sharp eyes and a glare that could freeze fire, she was infamous for enforcing every tiny rule with merciless precision. From lawn heights to mailbox colors, Karen's list of complaints was endless, and her favorite target was Mark's oak tree. "You really should trim that thing," Karen had told Mark just last week, her voice thin and cold as winter ice. "It's an eyesore. The HOA has rules about property appearances, you know. You don't want to upset the neighbors." Mark had brushed her off, confident his tree was healthy and beautiful, but a knot of unease twisted in his stomach. That morning, the neighborhood felt unusually still, as if holding its breath. Mark stepped outside, the familiar scent of pine and earth filling his lungs. But his eyes were drawn upward. The oak's thick branches swayed gently, leaves whispering secrets in the breeze. Something about the quiet made his skin prickle. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps on gravel interrupted the calm. Mark turned to see Karen striding toward his backyard gate, clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable. "Mark," she said without preamble, "I'm here on behalf of the HOA board. The tree has been flagged as a violation." Mark's eyebrows knit together. "Violation? It's healthy. What are you talking about?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "The board has received multiple complaints. The roots are allegedly damaging the sidewalk, and the canopy blocks sunlight from other properties. We're going to have to remove it." Mark felt his heart lurch. "You can't just decide that. I haven't been notified. There's supposed to be a process." Karen shook her head, eyes flashing. "This isn't a request, Mark. The HOA voted last night. The tree will be cut down by Friday." The words hit like a thunderclap. Mark's mind raced. How could Karen orchestrate this without telling him? Without even a proper discussion? He glanced around, noticing neighbors peeking cautiously through their curtains or across fences, curious, wary. A sudden chill crept up Mark's spine, and he realized this was more than just about a tree. This was about power. About control. "Karen," Mark said slowly, "I want to see those complaints and the vote records. This isn't right." Karen's gaze hardened, unsure the board will provide what you need. "For now, just know that the decision is final." She turned sharply and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Mark stood frozen, staring after her, the peaceful sanctuary of his backyard suddenly feeling like a battlefield. He looked up at the oak's sturdy trunk and wide branches, almost as if silently pleading for a miracle. But deep down, Mark knew this was only the beginning. The quiet neighborhood was about to erupt into chaos, and his beloved tree was caught in the eye of the storm. The moon hung low and pale over Willow Creek, casting eerie silver shadows across the manicured lawns and neat sidewalks. Most of the neighborhood was asleep, but Karen Mitchell was wide awake, her mind buzzing with the thrill of control and conviction. Tonight was important. An emergency HOA meeting was being called. Not a single homeowner except a chosen few knew about it. Karen arrived at the small community clubhouse, a modest brick building usually reserved for weekend gatherings and book clubs. But tonight, the atmosphere inside was charged with secrecy and tension. Karen's closest allies, a tight-knit group of the most vocal HOA members, awaited her arrival with anxious glances. "Did everyone get the message?" Karen asked sharply, her voice low but commanding. "Yes," murmured Linda, the HOA secretary, clutching a thick folder of documents. "The vote is almost unanimous. We're doing this tonight. No delays." Karen nodded, her eyes gleaming. "Good. We can't let Mark stall us any longer. That tree is a hazard and an eyesore. It's time to act." The others murmured agreement, their faces hardening with resolve. In hushed tones, they discussed logistics, when the tree would be cut, how to handle any objections, and most importantly, how to keep Mark in the dark until it was too late. Meanwhile, back at Mark's house, the quiet was different. Instead of peaceful, it felt thick, like the air before a storm. Mark had spent the afternoon making calls to neighbors, sensing a growing unease, but unable to nail down the source. No one would confirm if they had received any official notices from the HOA about the tree. The silence was deafening. Suddenly, Mark's phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Hello?" Mark answered cautiously. "Mark, listen carefully," a low, hurried voice whispered. "Something's happening tonight. Karen's planning something behind the scenes, an emergency HOA vote. They're going to cut down your tree without telling you. Be ready." Before Mark could respond, the call ended. His heart pounded. Was this a prank or a warning? Determined, Mark paced his living room, eyes flicking to the clock. Midnight was nearing. At the clubhouse, Karen and her allies voted swiftly, their decisions sealed in official-looking papers. No minutes would be recorded, no invitation sent. This was power exercised in shadows. Karen felt a surge of triumph. The tree would fall before Mark could blink. Her control over the neighborhood was growing stronger by the hour. But even as the meeting ended, unease gnawed at her. What if Mark fought back? What if the neighbors turned against her? For a moment, a flicker of doubt flashed in her eyes, quickly smothered by determination. Back at Mark's home, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Windows darkened, cars silent in driveways. The oak tree, tall and regal in the moonlight, swayed gently as if whispering warnings to the night. Mark stepped outside, his gaze fixed on the tree's silhouette against the starry sky. He felt small, powerless, but also steely with resolve. If the HOA wanted a fight, he was ready. And so, as the neighborhood slept, a battle was quietly set in motion. Under the cloak of darkness, chainsaws would roar, friendships would fracture, and the future of that mighty oak, and the fragile piece of Willow Creek, would hang by a thread. The first light of dawn crept hesitantly over Willow Creek, painting the sky in pale shades of pink and gray. The neighborhood, usually bursting to life with early birdsong and children's laughter, was strangely silent. Doors remained shut, blinds stayed drawn, as if everyone sensed something was wrong, but dared not speak it aloud. Mark was still asleep when a distant, relentless roar shattered the morning calm. Chainsaws. His eyes snapped open, heart hammering. That unmistakable, grating noise, the sound of destruction, was coming from his backyard. He threw on a shirt and ran outside, the cold air biting his skin. His breath came out in frosty clouds as he crossed the lawn, heart pounding with dread. His eyes widened in disbelief. There, in the early morning light, men with chainsaws were cutting into the thick branches of his beloved oak tree. Mark's chest tightened. He hadn't been told, hadn't given permission. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Stop! What are you doing?" The workers paused, glancing at one another uncertainly. "We're here under HOA orders," one said flatly, wiping sweat from his brow. "The tree's being removed today. No exceptions." Mark's mind raced. He fumbled for his phone, dialing frantically. "Karen, what's going on? You can't just cut down my tree like this," he shouted when she answered. Karen's voice was cold, unyielding. "The HOA voted on it, Mark. It's final. We gave you plenty of time, and you did nothing. But I never got official notice. This is illegal," Mark protested, desperation creeping into his tone. Karen's voice hardened. "You'll have your chance to appeal later. But for now, the tree comes down." Mark hung up, eyes locked on the growing pile of sawdust and falling limbs. Panic surged through him. He couldn't believe his beloved oak was being destroyed, and all because of Karen's secret meeting. Neighbors began to stir, drawn out by the noise. Some peeked through windows, others gathered cautiously at their fences. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Did Karen really authorize this without telling Mark? This isn't right. The tree's healthy. But Karen stood nearby, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a drill sergeant. "Keep moving. No delays. This is HOA business. Mark stepped closer, heartbreaking, and tried to negotiate. Please wait. Let's talk to the board. This isn't fair. Karen's eyes flashed dangerously. You'll get your say soon enough. But for now, step back. Then, as the chainsaws roared louder, Mark's worst nightmare unfolded. The workers were cutting through a thick main branch, and as it weakened, the enormous limb began to shift unpredictably. For a terrifying moment, it hung poised like a pendulum, then toppled violently, directly toward Karen's house next door. A gut-wrenching crash echoed through the neighborhood as shattered wood and glass exploded outward. Karen screamed, stumbling back as debris rained down on her porch. Neighbors gasped, some frozen in shock, others rushing toward the wreckage. Mark's heart pounded in his ears. Karen, he yelled, sprinting toward the damage. Are you okay? Karen emerged, shaken but unharmed, her face pale and wide-eyed. My house, she whispered, voice trembling. My garden? The reality of the catastrophe sank in like a stone. The tree that was meant to be cut down quietly, on Karen's orders, had instead destroyed her own home. Whispers turned into chaos. Some neighbors looked at Mark with sympathy. Others stared at Karen with disbelief. The fragile piece of Willow Creek shattered in that instant. Mark's mind reeled. Anger, shock, guilt. Confusion crashing together like a storm. Had Karen's reckless control gone too far? What would happen next? And could this nightmare spiral even further out of control? The deafening crash echoed through the quiet street, ripping through the morning air like a thunderclap. A massive section of Mark's oak tree, meant to be felled carefully, had veered wildly off course. It slammed with a violent force against Karen Mitchell's house, smashing through the living room window and tearing into the roof. Shards of glass flew like deadly rain, and chunks of splintered wood rained down onto the porch and driveway. Karen's screams pierced the chaos as she stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the wreckage. The once proud home was suddenly a battered shell, the pristine facade scarred by the tree's unforgiving assault. Neighbors rushed out of their homes, faces pale with shock and disbelief. Children were hurried inside by frantic parents. Dogs barked nervously, and the entire block seemed frozen in stunned silence. Mark stood rooted at the edge of his yard, heart pounding like a drum. His eyes were wide with horror and disbelief, his body trembling. His tree, his family's cherished sanctuary, had just destroyed Karen's house. The irony twisted inside him like a knife. Karen, are you okay? He shouted, his voice cracking. She stumbled to her feet, brushing dust and glass shards from her clothes. Her usually fierce demeanor was replaced with stunned vulnerability. I think so, she gasped, clutching her arm, where a few splinters had scratched her skin. But my house. Her voice broke, eyes filling with tears. Mark took a hesitant step forward, guilt and confusion war raging inside him. I didn't want this to happen. You shouldn't have cut down the tree without telling me. Karen's glare flashed back, fierce and unyielding despite the damage. It was the HOA's decision. You made me do it. You and your stupid tree. A tense silence fell between them, heavy and thick like storm clouds ready to burst. Suddenly, a loud crack snapped through the air. Another large branch, weakened by the initial cuts, broke free from the tree's trunk. It swung wildly and crashed into the ground, just feet from where a small crowd had gathered. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The tree was unstable, dangerous. Mark's eyes darted upward, searching the tangle of branches above. Was there more destruction waiting to happen? Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer. Someone had already called for help. Karen pulled herself together, brushing dirt from her clothes, and turned to the gathering neighbors. This is your fault, Mark. You could have stopped this. Mark shook his head slowly, voice low but steady. No one asked me. No one gave me a chance. The neighbors murmured, glancing nervously between the two. Some sided silently with Mark, who had been blindsided and disrespected. Others felt sympathy for Karen, whose home was now a disaster zone. From the corner of his eye, Mark spotted a small group huddled together, whispering urgently. They looked worried, as if there were secrets beneath the surface, secrets that might explain how things had spiraled so out of control. Suddenly, a sharp crackle of a radio broke the tension. Firefighters and police officers arrived, rushing to secure the damaged property and assess Karen's condition. Mark stepped back, overwhelmed. His mind raced. How would the HOA respond? Would Karen demand more destruction, more control? Or would the neighborhood finally stand up and say enough? As emergency crews worked, Mark's gaze drifted back to the shattered remnants of the oak tree. Its branches, once proud and sheltering, now lay broken and twisted, just like the fragile trust within Willow Creek. The peaceful neighborhood was no longer peaceful. The battle lines had been drawn. And Mark knew, deep down, this crash was only the beginning. The sun was climbing higher, but the morning's chaos had left Willow Creek drenched in a heavy silence. Karen's damaged house stood like a wounded fortress, its shattered windows boarded hastily, splintered wood patched with makeshift care. The neighbors' gazes lingered long after the emergency crews left, whispering behind half-closed curtains and over fences. Karen, still shaken but fiercely defiant, refused to back down. She paced her living room, now an eerie skeleton of debris, phone pressed tightly to her ear. "This is Mark's fault," she insisted to anyone who would listen. "If he had just trimmed the tree when we asked, none of this would have happened. He's negligent, reckless." Meanwhile, Mark sat in his kitchen, staring blankly out the window at the stump where his oak once stood. His hands trembled as he reread the voicemail Karen had left, accusing him of destruction and irresponsibility. But deep inside, Mark felt a knowing suspicion that the truth was more tangled than Karen's accusations. That afternoon, a knock at Mark's door jolted him. It was Linda, the HOA secretary, looking nervous and guarded. "Mark, can I come in?" "There are things you should know," she said quietly. Once inside, Linda pulled out a thick folder. "I've been going through the HOA files, and, well, some of this might surprise you." Mark leaned in, heart racing. What secrets could the HOA be hiding? Linda hesitated before revealing emails and meeting notes, documents showing Karen had pushed aggressively to remove the tree for months, long before any complaints surfaced. More shockingly, there were messages between Karen and a small group of HOA members plotting to speed up the removal, even suggesting cutting it down before Mark can stop us. Mark's eyes widened. She orchestrated this behind everyone's back. Linda nodded grimly. "It looks like Karen manipulated the votes, Mark. She didn't wait for proper procedures. And there's more. Complaints about the tree's safety were mostly fabricated." Mark felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over him. Karen's obsession had gone far beyond enforcing rules. It was personal. But why? Before he could ask, his phone buzzed again. Another voicemail, this one from an anonymous neighbor. "Mark, be careful. Karen isn't acting alone. There's a deeper conspiracy in the HOA. If you try to expose them, you might find yourself in trouble. Watch your back." A chill ran down Mark's spine. Who was warning him? And why? The neighborhood, once so familiar and friendly, now felt like a minefield. Later that evening, Mark found himself outside Karen's damaged home. She was planting new flowers in the battered garden, hands dirty but eyes sharp and guarded. "You think you're the only one who's been hurt," she snapped, catching his gaze. "My home's destroyed, my life's turned upside down. You think I wanted this?" Mark shook his head, voice low. "No, but I know you lied. You hid things, twisted the truth." Karen's expression twisted with anger. "You're just trying to ruin me." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves from the distant trees. As Mark walked away, he realized the truth would not come easily. The HOA's carefully constructed facade was cracking, and with it, the fragile piece of Willow Creek. But in the shadows, unseen eyes watched. Plans were already in motion to silence dissent, and Mark had no idea whom he could trust. The battle over the tree had opened a door to darker secrets, and Mark was about to walk right through it. The days that followed the tree disaster were heavy with suspicion and whispered warnings. Willow Creek's sunny streets seemed darker somehow, shadows stretching long and strange beneath the cracked sidewalks. Mark's peaceful neighborhood had become a battleground, not just over a tree, but over trust, power, and secrets lurking beneath the surface. Mark spent hours poring over the HOA documents Linda had given him. Emails, meeting minutes, and anonymous complaints, each revealing fragments of a carefully orchestrated plan. It wasn't just Karen pushing for the tree's destruction. There were others, faceless in the papers, pulling strings from behind closed doors. One name kept appearing: Samuel Grayson, the HOA president, a man whose polite smile and friendly ways masked a ruthless hunger for control. Mark decided it was time to confront the truth. Under cover of dusk, he drove to the Grayson estate, a sprawling mansion perched on the neighborhood's highest hill. The windows glowed warmly, a stark contrast to the cold dread curling in Mark's stomach. He rang the doorbell. After a long moment, Samuel answered, his expression smooth and unreadable. "Mark," Samuel greeted him with practiced charm. "What a surprise. Come in, please." Inside, the house was immaculate, walls adorned with art and trophies. But Samuel's eyes held something darker, a glint of calculation. "I hear you've been digging into the HOA affairs," Samuel said casually as they sat in the grand living room. Mark's jaw tightened. "Why the rush to cut down my tree? And why all the secrecy?" Samuel smiled thinly. The tree was a problem, a liability. It was damaging property values, blocking views. "We acted in the community's best interest. But the complaints were fake. The vote was rigged," Mark pressed. Samuel's smile vanished, replaced by a cold stare. "Accusations won't help you, Mark. The HOA makes the rules. You'll have to play by them." As Mark stood to leave, a sudden sound caught his attention, a faint rustling behind a heavy curtain. Before he could react, Samuel's expression darkened. "Careful, Mark," Samuel warned. "There are forces at work here that don't tolerate dissent." Mark left the mansion with more questions than answers. Who were these forces? And what price would he pay for standing up? That night, Mark's phone buzzed again, another anonymous message. "Trust no one. The HOA's reach goes deeper than you know. Watch the shadows." His eyes scanned the dark room, heart pounding. The next day, a new threat emerged. A letter slipped under Mark's door, an official-looking notice demanding he pay a hefty fine for violations tied to the tree incident. The deadline was urgent, the language legal and intimidating. Mark realized the HOA wasn't just wielding power, they were weaponizing it. He needed allies. Mark reached out to neighbors who had quietly supported him, forming a small but determined group. They met in secret, sharing stories of Karen's tyranny and the HOA's ruthless tactics. Together, they planned to expose the corruption and reclaim their neighborhood. But as the shadows deepened, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. And the fight for Willow Creek's soul was far from over. The atmosphere in Willow Creek had shifted from quiet unease to electric tension. Every conversation was laced with suspicion. Every glance over the shoulder hinted at unseen watchers. Mark and his newfound allies met under the veil of secrecy, their small group growing with each whispered warning and shared secret. In the dimly lit basement of an unsuspecting neighbor, they huddled around a table cluttered with papers, HOA emails, photos of Karen's wrecked house, and the official notice demanding Mark's fine. The air was thick with determination and fear. "We can't let them bully us into submission," Mark said, voice steady despite the storm swirling in his chest. "This is about more than just a tree now. It's about control. If we lose this, they'll do it to anyone who stands up." Linda, still shaken but resolute, nodded. "I've found discrepancies in the HOA's financial records. Funds disappearing, contracts awarded to friends of Karen and Samuel. This goes beyond petty neighbor squabbles. Corruption," muttered another neighbor, Daniel. "And they'll cover it up." Mark glanced around the room. They were up against a powerful machine, one that had woven itself into the very fabric of their community. But they also had something the HOA lacked: truth and courage. Their plan was bold. They would gather evidence, rally the neighborhood, and confront the HOA board at the next official meeting. They would expose Karen's secret meetings, Samuel's manipulation, and the web of lies that had shattered their neighborhood. But the night before the big meeting, unease settled over Mark like a heavy fog. That evening, his front door creaked open slightly, a shadow flickering just beyond the threshold. No one was there, but a chilling message lay on his doorstep, an ominous note scrawled in hurried handwriting. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Mark's pulse quickened. This was no longer just about a tree or a house. This was a war for the soul of Willow Creek. The next day, at the HOA board meeting, the room buzzed with tension. Neighbors packed the small conference hall, eyes wide with anticipation and anxiety. Karen arrived, her usual confidence wavering slightly under the weight of recent events. Mark stepped to the podium, holding a stack of documents. His voice rang clear and steady as he laid out the evidence. The secret votes, the manipulated complaints, the missing funds. Gasps echoed through the room as the truth spilled out like wildfire. Karen tried to interrupt, to discredit him, but the crowd was no longer hers to control. Neighbors whispered among themselves, faces hardening with resolve. Just as Mark finished, the lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. A collective gasp rose, and whispered panic spread. When the emergency lights flickered on moments later, Karen was gone. Chaos erupted. Rumors flew. Had she fled? Was this part of a larger plan? And who had cut the power? In the confusion, Mark's allies took advantage of the moment, urging the neighbors to stand united and demand a transparent investigation. As the meeting adjourned, Mark looked out at the crowd, determined faces, anxious but hopeful. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the people of Willow Creek were waking up. Yet, in the shadows beyond the clubhouse, a figure watched silently, calculating and waiting. The true fight was only just beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of whispers, meetings, and mounting pressure. Willow Creek was no longer the quiet, orderly neighborhood it once was. It had become a battlefield for truth and justice. The mysterious blackout at the HOA meeting left everyone uneasy, especially Mark. Karen's sudden disappearance only fueled the speculation. Mark's group grew stronger by the hour, rallying more neighbors who had quietly suffered under the HOA's iron grip. Linda's digging revealed more than financial misconduct. There were emails hinting at blackmail, threats, and a shadowy network controlling the community from behind the scenes. Determined to end the nightmare, Mark arranged for a private investigator to look into the HOA's dealings. The investigator's first report was explosive: secret bank accounts, forged documents, and even evidence that some of the anonymous complaints against Mark's tree were fabricated by HOA insiders. Then came the unexpected. Karen reappeared, this time at a community town hall, bruised and visibly shaken. She claimed she'd been threatened to stay silent, forced into hiding. But as Mark listened, a nagging doubt grew. Was she truly a victim or a mastermind playing a deeper game? The town hall was packed, the air thick with anticipation and suspicion. Mark stepped forward, armed with the evidence. He laid bare the corruption, the lies, and the betrayal that had poisoned their community. At first, Karen tried to defend herself, spinning a tale of victimhood and misunderstanding. But as the evidence mounted, cracks appeared in her story. Witnesses came forward, confirming her manipulations and deceit. Then, in a stunning twist, the private investigator revealed a final bombshell. Karen had orchestrated the entire campaign against the tree and the HOA board to seize control for herself. Samuel Grayson was merely a pawn in her game. Gasps filled the room as neighbors realized the full extent of the betrayal. Karen's carefully crafted image of victimhood shattered like glass. The HOA board was forced to resign amid scandal. Legal actions were launched, and the neighborhood breathed a tentative sigh of relief. In the weeks that followed, Mark and his allies worked tirelessly to rebuild trust and restore the community. The tree, once a symbol of division and destruction, was commemorated with a small plaque honoring the strength of the neighborhood spirit. As the sun set over Willow Creek, Mark stood beneath the new sapling planted in place of the old oak, feeling a quiet hope. The battle had been fierce, but justice had prevailed. Yet, in the shadows, a faint whisper lingered, a reminder that vigilance was the price of peace. The true story of Willow Creek was far from over.